This is Ray Stokes in the oral history section of the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine Library on September the 22nd, 1981. And I'm conducting an interview today in my office with one of the founders of TCOM, Dr. Carl E. Everett. Dr. Everett, we are pleased that you would come by and visit with us today and kind of go in reminiscence, kind of reflect on giving me an opportunity to help you dig into some of your memoirs of the past with reference to the work and the association that you were involved in, with reference to the beginning of the thought about establishing the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine. Do you, if you'll pardon the expression, but to kind of paraphrase a very popular quotation today, we've come a long way, but haven't we, since October 1, 1970, the day that we opened and rang the school bell, so to speak, and opened the doors? But what do you remember about that particular day or that week?
I can only say this, that it's hard to believe that we've made this much progress. We had a lot of ideas of what we could do, but I think that they were far short of what we have accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I think we need to do is express our appreciation to members of our profession here, especially in Fort Worth area, and the staff members of Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital for helping us in cooperation. Also, they helped us financially.
That's a red letter event, I'm sure, because as Secretary-Treasurer of the corporation, the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, when you got your charter, I think your title was Secretary-Treasurer, and Dr. Lewell was Chairman, and Dr. Bauer was Vice Chairman. But in those days, a lot has developed, I'm sure, since June 15, 1966. And I still marvel, as I've told Dr. Lewell a few times, I still marvel, and maybe you can kind of reflect on this to some degree. I marvel on your ability to get things done in such a small time framework of time, as far as you had a heavy load as a general practitioner here in Fort Worth, and you were very busy. I still marvel at the amount of your ability to get as much done as you did on like Wednesday or Thursday afternoon and weekends. What you think of any particular experiences you may have had in those formative years before back when you, even before, if you'll pardon my saying so, even before you even got around to saying okay to Stokes, you can go to work back in 1969. There's a period there of about 2 or 3 years that I know you had to do a lot of work. You conducted a feasibility study. You got out and pushed the possibility of opening the school, and you ran into a lot of opposition and a lot of it's impossible, defeatism type of opposition. So I know you got a lot of thoughts about that. What do you think?
Well, after we once started, we were sort of in a position where we couldn't stop. It was due to the cooperation. After we had the feasibility study, we went to the American Osteopathic Association, and they gave us some, as we called it, running around money. I think the American Osteopathic Association altogether gave us about $30,000 to get started. Also, about that time, we decided that we had to have somebody that would do a lot of this work for us, because we were busy. And another thing, we hadn't had very much experience. We didn't know exactly what we were doing part of the time. So we hired Ray Stokes.
Find anybody to know what they were doing, wasn't it?
So we hired you, Ray. You were our first employee, and we put you to work. I believe your office was down here close to the Malik Tower. is
Yeah,
that
across
right?
the street is Summit Building, 1500 West Fifth.
The Summit Building.
Yeah.
And we gave you a little office, and we started Ray Stokes to work.
Yeah, right.
And soon after that, I believe you were our first employee, and our next employee was Dr. Hart,
Henry Hart.
Dr. Henry Hart, and he came along a few months after you were there. How long was that, Ray?
Well, he came to work on, I believe it was September or October 1 of 1969, about 5 or 6 months after I was hired.
And we owe a lot to you, Ray, and Dr. Hart on helping us get started. Dr. Hart had a background, his college background and his experience at TCU and all. Besides being, he's just a wonderful fellow to work with, and he was also one of those people that was retired, yet he wasn't ready to stop working, and he gave a lot of his talents and all, and he applied his time, and I think he started out as on a part-time basis.
Yes,
maybe not.
until for about 4 or 5 months, and then I think as spring of 1970 approached, we became more optimistic about the possibilities and gave him a little bit more scope of activity because he needed to get out and try to find him a faculty, and of course he had to have a little more time for that.
About that time we had financial problems. We needed money that we didn't have, and we donated some out of our own pockets. And the chairman of our board, Dr. Lubel, he seemed to feel like that if I were going to be the treasurer, that I should make some effort to try to raise some money.
Well, now let me interject. I know of 2 particular nationwide letters that you wrote, and you got pretty good
Yeah, we
response.
did pretty well.
You really did.
We wrote to every member of the American Osteopathic Association mailing, and we got very good results.
I believe that's when first class was 6 cents.
It wasn't 18 cents
No.
then, that's true. Or we wouldn't have made that one. But we had pretty good return, not a great lot of money, but we did have better results than we thought we would have. Then we started individual solicitation of the osteopathic physicians in the area and over the state, and we got some help from a number of people and raised, I forget the amount we raised from the professional, and pledges was somewhere close to 200,000, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And we collected most of it, but at least part of it we did. And what we collected we really used and appreciated. These are about the main things that I can think of.
If I might just interject in total amounts as far as actual gifts to the school from the Texas profession particularly, I think over a period of about a total of about four or 5 years, there was just under, I know when we became a state institution, this 1st of September 1975, the Texas profession had supported, now I'm not talking about, I'm talking about just individual gifts from individual doctors in the state of Texas. They had given us just under $500,000. Now, of course, we had gotten much more than that through various grants from foundations and so forth, but as far as the profession, so they had done a tremendous, but before we get, while we're talking about finances, Dr. Everett, before we get away from the subject of professional or involvement as far as the doctor's pocketbooks were concerned, you mentioned in the beginning something about the support and the tribute that you certainly wanted to make known and go on record of attesting to the support that was given particularly by the members of the staff of the Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital. Do you want to enlarge any on that as far as the support that you got? I can think of one time, of course, I know it was through your efforts that when we think about opening the school and relate to the past, we sometimes overlook one aspect about our development, and that is we think about where we were and we think of the bowling alley, and we say that in a facetious, funny manner, but actually it goes beyond the bowling alley. We actually were born in a hospital on the 5th floor of the Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital. And I feel like that if you would just reflect a little bit on how did we get in the hospital?
That's a long story. We had just made our decision to open our first class in the fall of 1970. And the first thing we needed to do, we needed facilities, we needed staff, we needed faculty. We made that decision a few months beforehand, and after the decision we realized we still had to find some place that we could afford. We looked at several places over town that we thought we might put some classrooms, and finally it was suggested, someone came up with the idea, possibly we could use the 5th floor of Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital. It was an undeveloped floor, and possibly we could use that. This idea was presented to the board of the hospital, and it was received with a negative.
Very negative, was it?
And it absolutely didn't get any place at all. So after a little discussion...
Who was the principal participants, naming names in all
Dr.
reference?
Lubel was the president of the board in the hospital then. Dr. Phil Russell was the chairman of the board.
I see.
And Dr. Phil was the old Mr. Osteopathy of Fort Worth for many years, and he was responsible for a lot of our progress and all of the hospital development and so on. He was more responsible than anyone else. He was also a leader, and he was a person with a lot of very strong ideas. And he was very much opposed to using the 5th floor of the hospital for several different reasons. And one reason he did not feel that the hospital should be made a teaching hospital. He wanted it a private hospital. That's the way it started. Dr. Lubel and I were discussing the results we got from the board meeting, and I came up with the idea, well, why don't let's talk to Dr. Russell. We need to, maybe if we can convince Dr. Russell as chairman of the board of the hospital, then maybe we could really get someplace.
About how many votes would you actually needed, Dr. Everett? About how many were on the board?
Well, I think there were 5 members on the board, besides the representation from Carter Foundation had 2 members, and then Dr. Russell would be another one. So
you'd have to have 4 or 5 positives or affirmatives, would you?
We felt if we could convince Dr. Russell that this was a reasonable thing, then we wouldn't have any trouble with the rest of them. He was more or less in a leading position and so forth. He was looked up to as his opinion being what should point us in the right direction. So Dr. Lubel says, well, if that's the way you feel about it, why don't you go and talk to Dr. Russell yourself? We've done all we can do. So I called Dr. Phil, and I said, well, I need to talk to you. I want to come over and talk to you about the college. We've decided to make an opening of our new school, our first class, this coming fall, and we've got to have some action. And I want to come over. So he said, well, come on, Carl. Come on over on Sunday. I'll be home, and come on over on Sunday. So I went over about 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon after we'd gotten home from church. Went over to Dr. Phil's house. He lived on Hillcrest at that time. That afternoon, we had a norther come in, a Texas norther.
Texas norther.
And it was very, very cold. The wind was extremely high. It was down, I don't believe it was even close to 0, but it was quite low, very, very cold for this area anyway. And the room was cold. We sat in his front room, and he apologized for the fact that it was cold in there. And I had a cold. It didn't amount to anything when I got there. And we stayed there from 1 till about 6 o'clock. And finally...
5 hours, huh?
Oh, about 4. Well, it might have been 5, but it was a long session. And Phil gave me all kinds of reasons that he opposed to it and opposed to it. We kept talking and kept talking. And I brought out a few facts that I thought might help sell him. And I felt like I wasn't getting any place. Finally, after a long period of time, right before I left, he says, well, Carl, if that's what you want to do, we'll try it. But I just don't know whether it's smart or not. But I'll be for it if that's... And from then on, it was Dr. Phil's idea to put it on the 5th floor of the hospital.
It's his idea. Well, bless his heart.
So we started then, and between you, Ray, and Dr. Hart, and a few of the faculty members that they had lined up, they started improving the 5th floor. We put temporary structures up there and made rooms and set up a school. And on, well, let's see, latter part of September, we had our first class, right?
Well, they actually, they started registering and getting preliminaries worked out, but I think we actually called October 1, which was a Monday, as the first day. We were a little later than the conventional September 1 opening time, because, as you recall, we didn't get the green light from the AOA till the 9th of July in 1970 at their meeting in Atlanta to give us pre-accreditation. So, and that didn't give Dr. Hart but just a matter of a couple of months to line up his faculty. He had some pretty well in mind, and he'd had conducted some preliminary interviews and discussion with, but he really couldn't enter into a contract with anybody because, as we've stated before, all we had up till that time was a paper college.
Looking back on it, I don't think it could be possible to do that in that length of time.
In other words, they've got a TV program now that says it's incredible.
Incredible.
You think we invented that word, did we?
Incredible. This school class opened on the 5th floor. We had our dissection laboratory across the street in a garage apartment, what was a garage apartment. And we had, I think they had 5 bodies there for dissection, which was an adequate number for the small class of students we had. It wasn't a very impressive way to get a college started, but it served a purpose, and I feel that we got by with it, you might say. One of the things we had so much problems and so many objections from our state association officers at that time in starting a school on such a shoestring. And also we had a number of osteopathic physicians that really, some of them have turned out to be good friends of the college now, but they were very much opposed to opening a college that we'd be ashamed of, so to speak. One that would not give adequate training to our students, and this was quite something to overcome. And at the same time, maybe if we hadn't gotten such violent reactions from some of these people, maybe we wouldn't tried so hard. So
really they
I
were
try to
supporters
look
whether they realized it or not.
I try to look at the good points of everything that was bad that happened. So.
That's excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Everett, for kind of filling us in on exactly the circumstances under which we were fortunate enough to acquire the fifth floor of the hospital. And you know, I think there's another thing that ought to go on record, and that is, of course, naturally, we were assessed rent, and we were supposed to be paying for utilities and so forth, and on paper it worked out that we probably would be paying like $40,000 a year rent and so forth. But you know, that's one good thing that that I'm grateful for as acting business manager at the time. It might have been rather difficult to pay. The only thing that I paid regularly without, and you'll recall, because you signed the checks, was that we had that house 3600 across the street, and then I mentioned the anatomy lab was the garage apartment behind it. Well, you know, the 3600 was our business office, so to speak, and actually, well, it was administration building, so to speak, and the classrooms and faculty and library were on the fifth floor, and the labs. But one thing that I paid with regularity was that we paid $90 a month, and then later got the garage apartment with another $35. So I paid $125 a month rent to the administrator, you know, over at the hospital each month. So that's and we paid that. But now I don't think anybody ever paid for the use, including the utilities. Not that we failed to meet an obligation, but we just never were billed. So I think that's something that ought to go on record, that because you know the board knew that we weren't paid, because some of our officers wore two hats. They were officers in the hospital and officers on our board. So including Dr.
Well, looking back on it, I don't see how we could possibly have made it financially if we had not been involved with the hospital, if the hospital hadn't been helping us, and so forth. And this meant a whole lot to us. And a lot of the members of the hospital staff donated their time as faculty members.
That's an important factor also, Dr. Everett.
They gave their time without pay, and they gave special attention to our students because they realized that these students needed special attention, and by doing so, them giving all this time and all they received no funds for it.
Right.
I think the students got as good training and good a background as they would have if they were in an institution that were funded much more better than we were.
Let's move on to another subject in that realm, Dr. Everett. You know, one thing that actually put us in business was naturally saying that we had some property worth $300,000. You know, that was the land, the 50 acres of land that was given to us by the Vandergrifts and Carlisle Craven out in Arlington. And through the efforts, all of this was brought about through the efforts of Dr. Bobby Smith, at that time I think was president of the association. And with his efforts, it made it possible for us to be the recipient of this acreage out in South Arlington, which was way out in the country at that time. But we did claim that we had 50 acres of land, which was given to us with the proviso that we couldn't do anything with it except build on it and build a school and that sort of thing. But that $300,000 that we said we
made
had
financial report looked pretty well.
That's right. That's right. It really did, and that in itself was worth a great deal to us. There's no question about it. But do you recall anything particularly about that occurred at that time with reference to the land that we received, and then the not necessarily controversy so much, but the fact that a year and a half later, after we hadn't actually utilized the land other than claiming it as a potential building site, because we'd already opened here in Fort Worth in the Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital. But do you recall anything that occurred that made it necessary, or you felt necessary, to return the land to the Vandergriffs and Mr. Carlisle, Craven?
The only thing that I can recall, with giving it a lot of study and looking into the situation, it became, we felt, unreasonable to move on this land and try to build and construct a building for a few reasons. There's several reasons there. One of the reasons was this was quite a ways out in the country.
Yeah.
There wasn't any building, there wasn't any facilities around for student housing or faculty. Also, most of our faculty were donated. I mean, most of our faculty were giving their time, and most of them were connected with Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital and on the staff at the hospital, and they were not willing to drive all that distance, which would have been a 45-minute drive at least from here.
Much more than that now.
Give their time and to come in. Also, having students drive in and out was a problem. And another thing would have been, even on the temporary structures, we could not get temporary construction or temporary buildings done in the length of time that we wanted it done. Then if we did get a building, even on a temporary basis, if we did get it built in time for the first class, it would be a considerable expense, and we felt that we were not at the time in a position to financially to afford to do that even. So being in such a problem financially, and the location of the land area, we decided we needed to make other arrangements, and we went to the 5th floor of Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital.
Well, that's fine. We, of course, like I say, we did return the land, but it served a purpose. I recently had the opportunity to talk to former Mayor Tommy Vandergriff, and I tried my best to convince him that we rule that as one of the most important facets of our success. If we hadn't had that land, we probably wouldn't be here today discussing this aspect of the past as far as that's concerned. But I don't know whether I convinced him or not. But nevertheless, I don't think they took the land back, and they now have it kind of converted into a park. It's a park there in South Arkansas, although part of the land is still not developed. I think part of it I was by it recently, and it's still a cotton patch.
It's still out in the country.
It's still out in the country. However, it's much closer to communications now, because it's just about a mile south of the new Interstate 20 that goes by there, So it's in a little better location, comparatively speaking, than it was 6, 7, 8 years ago. Well, let's move on up to Denton County. We became affiliated with North Texas, and then we'd worked on a contract with them prior to that, in 72, and 72 to 75, we had a contract in which they were training our the basic science were taught there, and then the clinical years were taught here in Fort Worth. Let's reflect a little bit prior to that date in which we became state, September 1, 1975, and that's when, of course, you as the treasurer of the board of directors relinquished your title and gave up your direct affiliation with the school. Can you think of anything particularly that highlights, that's significant about what brought this all to a climax, a conclusion? Of course, we had the contract, and then we fought pretty hard, legislatively speaking, had lots of support from the profession and the community and friends who made it possible for us to become affiliated with North Texas. Do you feel that, was that the time to move, Dr. Everett? Or should we have remained a private institution longer, or what are your reflections? Was that the right time to make the move that we made?
Ray, I feel that a move had to be made. We, back on the financial angle of the thing, for one thing, we were growing, we were admitting other classes, and it was time that we had to do more. We had to make progress. We had to have more faculty. We need more teaching equipment. There's just no end to what we needed to make a first-class medical school. We were not a school, we were not endowed with any money. We had gotten some help through the state legislature for 2 years, I believe, and then it became apparent that we needed to be affiliated with one of our university systems in the state of Texas, and this was just seemed natural. We had already had worked with North Texas, and they were interested and they were willing. So this is the direction that we took, and we had a lot of cooperation, I think, with Dr. Jeter Nolan was president of North Texas at the time, and he was very interested and was help to us. Dr. Silva, trying to recall what his first name is.
GFK were his initials, or are his initials, but I think they called him Glenn, I believe. Isn't that what?
I believe that's right.
I believe.
I just slipped my mind now. Those men were real friends to TCOM, and they helped us get started, and I think we were one of the best things that ever happened to us. Just took a lot of legislative work and a lot of influence that way, and we had our friends helped us out. And I guess you might say we were lucky.
Well, then I guess you might have already answered this next question about what would be memorable to you about the NTSU TCOM affiliation. I guess that probably, can you add anything to what you've already said as far as the affiliation is concerned?
Right away, it was a pleasure to work with the North Texas group, and I think we owe them a lot. Looking back on TCOM, on our background, we owe a lot to North Texas State University.
Well, in that same respect, Dr. Everett, how much impact and assistance do you think the Texas Osteopathic Medical Association contributed to TCOM during the school's early years?
The Osteopathic Medical Association of Texas board, House of Delegates elected each year a representative on our board, and these representatives helped us keep in contact with the association and the rest of the members of the state of Texas. And at the beginning, we had very little help or cooperation with the state association itself. Part of the reason for that was they felt like it should be run and controlled completely by the state association. This is the idea that some of them in this association felt. And then about that time when we did have a representative on our board from TOMA.
Right.
And we, all of them are involved. It's a matter of, it was a matter of growth, education, and a matter of normal progress, maybe, to go along through these lines that we went through.
Dr. Everett, you and I both have had a little bit of experience in fundraising and various developmental processes, financially speaking, particularly with reference to TCOM and struggling each payday to get the bills paid and so forth, but back in 1970, 71. So we can think with a great deal of pride about our accomplishments and our achievements as we reflect on the past. But one thing that I would like for you to elaborate on, if you will, some people are not familiar to a great extent with the fact that now that we are a state entity and part of the state educational system, there are certain prohibitive prohibitions, so to speak, with reference to fundraising and the use of certain funds, particularly the funds that are allocated from the tax dollar. Of course, so I wonder, and you know, back in the beginning, we felt it necessary to establish a TCOM Foundation. And Dr. Everett is president of the TCOM Foundation. And as the president, the head of the foundation that's now been organized now since 1978, and I believe you were the first president and continuing president. Would you comment on the structure and the function of the foundation? It is an outside entity, but it's a kissing cousin, and it has a lot to do with the funding of things that we need that are not tax supported. Can you kind of comment on something like that?
The foundation was established for the reasons that you mentioned. To run a college and an institution such as we have, it's necessary to have funds and money available that is not restricted. There is, on the state budgets for the TCOM, it does not allow for such things as student recruiting expenses. It doesn't allow for anything for public relations work. It doesn't allow for, for instance, on hiring faculty and people to work in the college. It doesn't allow for moving expenses for people. There's just so many things that it doesn't allow. The president of the college or any members of the college are not allowed anything for social reasons.
Right.
He can't have a dinner, or he can't invite anybody out to lunch, or anything else that's necessary for a smooth operating college. So this is some of the things that the foundation is trying to do. The foundation was appointed. The members of the foundation was appointed and are approved by the North Texas State Board of Regents in the beginning, and We have, so far, this still needs approval for any new members on that in the board. We have made some progress. I've been well pleased with the amount of progress we've made. We are separate from the college. We are involved with the Office of Development in the college.
Right.
And the Office of Development helps us a lot with our secretarial work and some of our work. We hope that we'll have a better relationship in the future than we have in the past. This all depends on what you can do to meet the requirements. The foundations being a separate entity, we can't very well take advantage of the people or the employees of the college, and without working it out with our, what would that be, through the board that sets up the budgets and so forth for the colleges.
Yeah, the budget board.
Budget board. That's not the name that I'm trying to.
No, you're right. I can't think of it either.
I think we've done pretty well. We have, at the present time, we have a drive out to try to get participation as a money-raising type of thing. The foundation I'm talking about.
Right.
Trying to get everyone to belong to the President's Club that are interested in that. That costs them an annual fee to belong to that. We have, this helps us to in some of our activities and so forth. We also take one evening out with a reception and a dinner, breakfast dance, and a reception for people in the communities and people in the faculty and all. We feel like we would like to impress some of the hopes we have that some of the foundations will be interested in helping the foundation some. And we've built it up. We've probably got $100,000 financial statement, which we think is not as good as we had hoped for, but probably is, for the efforts we've put out, probably.
Well, I'm sure you have some difficulty convincing people that as a state institution you don't need outside benevolent help. And that's a very difficult thing to overcome.
That's right. That's really a problem that we're trying to overcome some. The foundation is set up purely for the help of the college. Everything is for the good of the college, and that's the reason for it. And some of them say, well, what are you trying to do raising money for? And why? Well, just to put it in, boil it down, we're organized to help the college. And they need the financial help, as well as we need a lot of public relations. We need, I don't know whether I should say, we need legislative contacts.
Right.
And we need to be constantly on our toes in the college. People are training students. They're not trying to run politics.
Right.
And whether we want to face it or not, there's a lot of political involvement that takes place with any school. And even if we're a state school, so to speak, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And this is some of the things that the foundation is working for, and we hope that we'll be successful.
Well, based on what information I have and what you've given me, Dr. Everett, I think you've done quite well in the 3 years that you've been in business. You've made very good progress. And I certainly want to thank you for sharing your memoirs with us, highlighting some of the red letter days of the life of TCOM from your association as one of the founders. And I know you had some few days of experiencing the valley of despair, but then you also had a few moments of mountaintop glorious experiences. Is there one particular, can you kind of conclude your thoughts about your relations with TCOM? Can you think of anything that's a little more monumental, the most significant thing that you can think of as a part of your life with TCOM that we haven't already shared or discussed?
Ray, I don't recall anything especially. I'm real proud of TCOM. I'm happy that I had something to do with getting it on the road and something to do with the development. I think TCOM is making an impression here in Fort Worth, if nothing else, because Med Ed 1 and Med Ed 2 is looking pretty well.
It certainly, they certainly are.
These are two structures that look mighty good, and we get a lot of comment. I think we're going on record are helping the record of the osteopathic profession, and we're putting out Class A students now, or the college is putting out Class A students that are making records that we're really proud of. I think that's about the only thing that I can think of, Ray, unless you can recall something.
Well,
Remind me of
in that same thought, we have tried awfully hard, of course, to create two things: identity and image. And they're not inseparable. I mean, they're not necessarily the same thing. You can have identification and have a poor image. We've been trying from 1970 to get identity and an image too created. And I think the work that you helped start and the work that I have just a finger in continuing now as the curator here in the library, I feel gratified that the words identification, I think we do have a better identity. We're out here on the hill, the people in Fort Worth begin to know what TCOM means. They don't necessarily think of TCU, they think of TCOM on that level, and the identity that we have is giving a good image. And that, I think, makes the two kind of merge together into one particular thought.
That's great.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Everett. We appreciate your coming by and sharing your thoughts with us, and look forward to keeping in touch with you, and wish the work of the foundation continued success.
Thank you, Ray.